Hello, everyone. I thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk on common mistakes and pearls in OCT interpretation and injections. Broadly, I'll be covering the topics of the common retinal diseases of CNVM and diabetic macular edema. Before one starts diagnosing retinal diseases or starts treating medical retina patients with injections, one should know the layers of the retina on OCT very well so that you can be the master of the OCT machine. I'm not going to talk in detail about the different layers of the retina, but knowing each and every layer helps in the correct diagnosis as well as in prognosticating the patients in terms of what's going to be the likely outcome after a series of injections. So, what is the importance of etiological classification of CNVM? CNVM by itself is not a disease, it's just a sign. There can be many diseases which can be associated with CNVM. Like you can see here on this slide, so many different retinal diseases, right from choroidal osteoma to high myopia to injured streaks or inflammation, can be associated with CNVM apart from macular degeneration. So it's important to know the underlying pathology. Sometimes you need to treat them. Sometimes they can point to a serious life threatening or a systemic disorder, which you would probably like to treat and not just the CNVM. And also, it helps us to prognosticate in terms of the number of injections and the improvement in vision. Not every CNVM needs multiple injections every year, unlike ARMD. So, what are the types of CNVM based on OCT, which is like histopathology? The important landmark in classifying CNVMs on OCT is the RPE line. If the CNVM is below the RPE, as in this case, you can see most of the CNVM is under the RPE, it's called a type 1 CNVM. Now, type 1 CNVMs are generally associated with macular degeneration or CSR, and you should know that these kind of CNVMs, whatever drugs you inject inside the eye, they do not penetrate the RPE and have as much efficacy compared to those CNVMs which are above the RPE. So CNVMs above the RPE are likely to regress faster and have a better visual outcome if you treat them appropriately. What about type 2 CNVM? As you can see here, the CNVM is above the RPE line. You can see a lot of subretinal fluid. These are diseases which probably need lesser injections than type 1 CNVMs under the RPE because drugs which we inject inside the eye, different molecules, they have an easier access to CNVM above the RPE. And there is another type which is not a CNVM exactly, but an, form of macular degeneration which we describe as type 3 neovascularization, which is the RAP lesion or retinal angiomatous proliferation, which starts intraretinally and then can proceed subretinally and even under the RPE. So, just in brief, occult versus classic CNVM, while occult is, and classic are classifications based on FA, you can correlate them with the OCT. Occult CNVMs are usually under the RPE or type 1 CNVMs, and classic CNVMs are usually above the RPE, um, what you call as type 2 CNVM. And I've listed the different causes of these CNVMs, and most importantly, type 1 CNVM, they progress slow. Macular degeneration associated CNVM or a CSR associated CNVM, they usually progress slow, but they also respond slow, which means you have to keep giving a lot of injections and the fluid doesn't go away easily with injections. Whereas type 2 CNVMs can progress very rapidly, like myopic CNVM, but they also resolve fast if you give the appropriate number of injections early on. Not every hyporeflective space on OCT is fluid. As in this case, you can see you can see well demarcated high reflective border and a circular lesion. And within that lesion is the hyporeflective area. These are called outer retinal tubulations. They're not to be misinterpreted as subretinal fluid or intraretinal fluid. These are attempts by the photoreceptors to regenerate, usually occur in late stages of CNVM, and it's not necessary to treat them with anti-VEGF injections. What about subretinal scar? We tend to see quite a few patients who have been receiving injections for subretinal scar. As you can see here, there's no need to treat subretinal scar without any fluid with anti-VEGF injections. What do we tell a patient, especially of macular degeneration, if you give them injections? What's going to be the outcome in terms of number of injections or even the visual acuity gain? The CAT trial was designed to look at ranibizumab versus bevacizumab monthly or PRN. And as you can see here, the difference between bevacizumab PRN or ranibizumab monthly was less than 4 letters. In general, they have a similar outcome. They were non-inferior, but if you look at the fluid drying capacity, ranibizumab had a better uh, reduction in fluid compared to bevacizumab. There are some cases which can masquerade like CNVM, like in this 42-year-old gentleman who had a pigmented scar in the right eye, and the left eye had a subretinal yellowish lesion right under the macula. And this gentleman had received 2 injections elsewhere, and he came to us for another opinion. And what we looked at in the right eye, uh, this kind of pigmentation is not typical of macular degeneration. And the left eye lesion also was not looking like a CNVM, especially when we repeated the OCT. You can see the pigment epithelium is relatively intact, and there is a lot of subretinal hyperreflectivity, which could be due to fibrin deposition. And when we did the fluorescein in this patient, showed typical CSR leak. So it's important to not forget the role of fluorescein angiography even now at this time when we have OCT angiography. We did navigating laser in this patient to the leak, and without any further injections, the fibrin material resolved. You can see the pre-laser and post-laser OCT, quite a dramatic difference. Switching to diabetic macular edema, the DRCR protocols have guided us in terms of practical applications, how to prognosticate patients, and how to differentiate between the different anti-VEGF molecules in DME. Protocol I was one of the most useful protocols for diabetic macular edema, comparing ranibizumab with prompt or deferred laser and also intraretinal triamcinolone. We won't talk about triamcinolone here, but if you look at the overall 5-year follow-up, the most important point to know is that patients have about 7 to 10 letters of gain in vision on average. So that's an important thing which we have to tell our patients. What to expect after all these injections? Will they become 6.6? Will they be having 6.12? It all depends on where they start off. On average, they will have 7 to 10 letters of gain. But there is a difference in the outcomes if the baseline vision is good, that is better than 20/50. These patients tend to have only one line of gain, whereas patients who have vision less than 20/40, about 618 or worse, they tend to have much more improvement, like almost 18 to 20 letters, as you can see here. And that too, deferred laser patients did better than patients who underwent prompt macular laser. So at this point of time, at least in central involving DME, we are not using macular laser as often as we used to before the advent of anti-VEGF injections. What about the different types of injections? Do they have any difference? Aflibercept or Eylea, bevacizumab or Avastin, ranibizumab or Lucentis, Accentrix. So protocol T compared them head to head. And again, patients who had less than 20/50 vision, their aflibercept or Eylea had the highest improvement in vision compared to Avastin or Lucentis, although Lucentis or ranibizumab was quite similar to aflibercept. This is in patients who have vision 20/50 or less at baseline, that is about 618 or less. What about patients who had vision 20/50 or better, 618 or so or better? These patients did not have much of a difference whichever anti-VEGF agents we used. But definitely in terms of OCT outcomes, aflibercept had the highest drying capacity compared to the other two injections. So what's the practical reality at this point of time? VRSI did a survey this year and asked the retina specialists after how many injections would they switch from one injection to another, and typically 2 to 3 injections is what we would look at before switching the patients to another injection. And usually the switch would not be to another anti-VEGF but rather to steroid such as dexamethasone implant or Ozurdex. What about patients who have good vision at baseline with center involving macular edema? So we know that if the macular edema is not involving the foveal center, we tend to manage them either with laser or observation. But what about patients who have center involving macular edema, but the vision is good? So protocol, we looked at this and found that observation or injection or laser were quite similar. So you can tend to observe these patients and they did not have much of a significant difference in outcome. What I would like to show in the end is that we should all be retina specialists in terms of good clinicians rather than tend to treat only the OCT. You cannot treat as a doctor a CT scan or an ultrasound. You have to have sound clinical experience to make decisions because sometimes OCT can be misguiding. Like this patient who was referred to me with macular edema and was advised injection. In fact, this patient came for another opinion. And when I looked at this patient carefully with the 90D, I could not find any reason for macular edema. I could not see any hemorrhages, any inflammation. So the first thing you need to question is this the correct diagnosis or what is the reason for this macular edema? And when we repeat those CT, we found a macular hole. So you must look at all the scans on the OCT and not just one scan which the patient is carrying as a printout, because it may not be going through the center of the pathology. So this is actually a surgical disease rather than a medical disease. Imagine what would have happened with injection in this kind of patient. The hole would have still persisted. So a good clinician would look at all the scans, correlate with fundus examination, and repeat fundus examination when in doubt. So you should rely more on clinical skills than just tests alone. I'm showing an example here of intravitreal injections which need to be given extremely carefully. Not anyone, especially those who are not trained, should not be giving injections. It can be risky even if you are a good cataract surgeon. So here, cataract surgeons tend to give the injection more parallel to the pupil and are more likely to touch the lens or even give the injection inside the lens. As you can see here, this is an Ozurdex injection which is being given injected now. It went accidentally into the lens and then the photoemulsification is starting. The surgeon had not realized for a long time that the Ozurdex was intralenticular and the Ozurdex has been emulsified along with the lens. So you must get trained before you inject. So in conclusion, control the urge for injection. The most common mistake is clinical evaluation and interpretation, and do not harm the patient. Thank you for your kind attention.